Thank you.
All right, hello everyone and welcome. I'm Jessica Liu, one of the co-chairs of the Keck Science Meeting, and I'm speaking on behalf of our former, most recently retired co-chair, Chuck Seidel. Thank you, Chuck, for all the hard work over the years. And our brand new, just announced, fresh off the boat, new SSC co-chair, Andrew Howard. And of course, on behalf of the whole SSC as well. All right, so just as a reminder, where do we fit? What is this SSC, the Science Steering Committee, for those of you who don't know? Well, we're your representatives into the Keck leadership, which amounts to a big committee of us sitting right in the middle amongst the wider community of both Keck Observatory users and Keck Observatory instrument builders. And we try to provide advice and recommendations to both the director and deputy director, chief scientist, and the CARE board of directors. Now, what's fun is we get to see all the nitty gritty and all the cool ideas that all of you have, but we also get to make no decisions. So all the decisions are made by the board of directors and the directors. We just provide lots of advice, hopefully good advice, and try to bring your voices to bear on a lot of the decisions that get made. So this is the membership and charter of that Science Steering Committee. You can see we have representatives from UC, Caltech, NASA, the wider US community, and now internationally Swinburne University as well. If you're ever interested in serving, let us know. The committee members tend to roll over every few years, so there's lots of opportunities to participate. The kinds of things that we do are listed here. I'll just go over some of the key actions that we took or recommendations we made in the last year. We commonly recommend instrument upgrades. Our instruments are amazing. They're what give us such amazing science results. Thanks to all of you. But they do need some help every once in a while as they get older. In particular, you'll know about the DMOS detector upgrade. The upgrade of the cooling systems has been critical, as all of these liquid cooling systems are very expensive to operate. We'd like to switch them to cryo coolers, which now can replace most, but not all, of the cooling systems. We talked about KPIC, which was you may recall, just a test bed instrument for a while, and it was so successful that people really wanted to be able to use it broadly, and so we recommended that KPIC be facilitized. We talked about AO upgrades and upgrading the deformal mirror. You just heard Subaru's upgrading their DM, now Keck is too with the HACA program. So that's just a little flavor of things that we've been talking about a lot in the last year. In addition to instrument upgrades, we also talk about project readiness. These are operational side projects, something like unattended night operations, which I'll talk about more, and other kinds of AO upgrades. We just keep an eye on them. And if decisions have to be made about scheduling downtime or whatnot to support these, we help advise when that's done. We definitely look at new instruments in the pipeline. We are often guided by the strategic plan, which is now, it's pretty fresh. It's just a year and a half old or so. And we look and consider concepts and phase A's via an annual white paper process. So if you're not on the email list for these, please tell, I think, Shelley or Megan or someone, and we'll get you on the list. But every June, July, the observatory makes an announcement, a call for white papers for new ideas, for new instruments and new capabilities of the observatory. And the SSC makes recommendations about which ones should go forward. And then lastly, we develop and advise on process and science-related, science-relevant operations decisions, including what is that process for building new instruments, and most importantly, here today, the instrument retirement process as well. Okay, so just a little bit more detail on a few things. Instrumentation development pipeline. There is a very deep pipeline. One of the things that makes Keck the most special is how connected all of you are to your observatory. You care about not just the spectacular science you're working on, but also you care about the success of the observatory and trying to make it better. That goes a long way to making Keck special. And as a result, we have a really deep pipeline of new instruments we'd like to build if we can afford it. And that's shown over here. All of these new instruments are ideas that went into the strategic plan, or I've now added a time-domain spectrograph, which is one we just mentioned in the strategic plan, but is already coming to fruit. If we can find funding, that's all of the things that we have in the 2035 era with the start of the ELTs. And you can see that's a long, long list. It includes seeing limited spectrographs, multi-object spectrographs, imagers, AO capabilities all across the board. So grand visions, and now we're working on figuring out how to get it all done. In the specific 2024 white paper process, we had 14 white papers, a really dynamic community. Thank you to all of you. there's a very limited amount of money to develop these new concepts. There's only about 150K to distribute. And we're really limited by that amount of money and also just the sheer number of flat FTE, as you saw from Rich's plot earlier, at Keck Observatory to be able to support all of those. So if your white paper didn't get through this year, it wasn't because it wasn't spectacular. It was just because we're limited here. Keep applying. Those that were approved include the exploration of a second fiber feed for KPF on Keck 2. We know KPF is a very popular facility and we'd like to make it available on more nights. Keck Adaptive Secondary Mirror is trying to advance to a preliminary design. So that was one of the white papers approved. This would take out the current secondary mirror, probably of Keck 1, replace it with an adaptive secondary mirror that could feed all of the seeing limited, make them seeing enhanced spectrographs and imagers, and provide more actuators for the Keck 1 adaptive optics system. And then Phobos, a wide field multi-object optical spectrograph that would sit on the Naismith bench. There's some risk reduction going on there for how we would position the fibers of such a large multi-object spectrograph. Would it be starbugs or some kind of zonal positioner as is used in things like DESI? Proposals that will be going forward over the next year include this fiber feed for Keck 2, KPF on Keck 2 that we said, CHASM, some exploration of visible light adaptive optics, so moving our diffraction limited resolution into the visible and trying to look at what that's going to take. An H-band vector vortex for coronagraph for NERC2. That would be a short-term deployment since NERC2 is very quickly here going to be, we think, supplanted by scale. And an infrared wavefront sensor for Keck 2 adaptive optics, which we had and then lost, and hopefully we can get it back again with a new proposal. All right, instrument suite evolution. Yeah, so the instrument suite evolution. I know this is a big conversation. We're going to have a whole panel breakout here, but I just wanted to give you the SSC's perspective on where this began. So as Rich mentioned, major cost and schedule implications for not retiring instruments is one of the reasons we're having this conversation now. We need to retire instruments to make room for new ones. We had an instrument suite evolution committee that worked for more than a year, very intensively. And thank you for all of the members that were on there. I think I have them listed maybe in the next slide. And they worked extensively to gather a huge amount of data to allow us to consider what instruments, how they're being used, what has the most impact, what has the most cost, as you'll see in the next slide. And we worked to develop a process for retiring instruments. We really want to make this, this is the first step of the process of retiring instruments. We want to make clear and plentiful communication to all of you about what we're thinking and get your feedback. So all along the way, we have steps for considering that. But first, instrument location. If we want new capabilities, we have to make some room. This is a schematic of the Keck telescope and all of the very valuable real estate, as John and Mark did a nice presentation showing what the multiplier on real estate is in here. You see the Naismith platforms on both sides. And then there are, when the instruments are not on the telescope, they have to sit on this ring that's sitting around there. That's their resting place or their home. There are a couple of bent calf ports too that are less widely used. So if you have small instrument ideas, that would be something you should look at. Okay, but it's almost all full. That's the issue. It's almost all full and there's not a lot of room for new instruments. So we have to make room if we want to keep developing. So the new instruments will need those focal stations, but we also have to be careful. Weight is a concern for both Keck 1 and Keck 2. And so we're not just looking about next year, the next 10 years, but decades out, what we're going to do for making room for new capabilities on the telescope. Okay, more details on the committee. The committee met for something like every 1 to 2 weeks. This was a high density committee for over a year, or a little over under a year. The committee membership represents a breadth of Keck partnership, science, and technical expertise, and you can see the members listed there. Again, thank you for all your hard work. They surveyed all of you. They took Keck Science Meeting. At last year's Keck Science Meeting, there was a set of discussions that we had talking about instrument suite evolution. They collected a broad range of metrics and data sets under consideration, collecting publications, citation rates, usage, all the resources required to support an instrument at headquarters and the summit, technical risk, costs, you name it. And so all of these categories have to be considered. not just the science yield itself. Here are the 5 categories of things that we consider, and gives you little snippets of the kinds of things that these roll down into. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just under science relevance, we consider things like past glory, future promise, killer applications, really trying to cover all the basis of what is quality science that comes out of an instrument. Okay, and the SSC recommend, and the board approved recently, a process for instrument retirement based on all of this fantastic data and advice from the committee. So this is the process that we've come to so far. And if you have thoughts, let us know. But most importantly, look for the decision points in bold. This is where you need to weigh in. Once an instrument's been identified for retirement, we start a 2-year process. The clock starts. That culminates eventually in the instrument being permanently removed from the telescope. So the first thing is somebody, usually the observatory, provides us a justification for why an instrument should be retired. We review it in the context of all of the information that I just presented in the last couple slides. And there's a decision point here recommended by the SSC and put forward to the board. That decision point is recommending the advancing the instrument to last chance status. From there, you will have you'll have 2 semesters to use the instrument before it will go into what's called hibernation mode. So the TACs will be made aware of the limited time horizon. The schedulers will ensure all approved proposals are scheduled time. We'll solicit feedback from you actively during those last 2 semesters. And then after the 2 semesters, we have another decision point. We recommend advancing the instrument to hibernation based on the feedback and usage in the last semester. And then finally, hibernation means you can't use it for a year, but it's still there. It's still sitting on the telescope. It might still incur some operational costs. We're keeping our just in case card in our pocket. The proposal calls for the final 2 semesters have announced the plan for hibernation. And then during that last semester, we basically we can prepare for warm up, power down, and hibernation. We put it into hibernation. And the last scheduled instrument, after the last night, the instrument's turned off. No more cooling of the instrument, power's turned off, and it's just sitting there waiting for about a year. And then finally, the third decision point is at the end of that year, we consider again, was there anything new and exciting, some big change in the field that requires us to reconsider our decision and bring it out of hibernation? If that's a no, then the instrument goes into full removal from the telescope. So that's the process. Here it is in schematic form, and I think Rich will show you this again later. Those decision points are marked in green, and that's where we want your feedback at each stage. Okay, so what have we decided for the next year? This will be the topic of the panel discussion in a moment. NIRES will be hibernated at the end of 2025B. Provide your feedback now at the email that you saw earlier. I will go through NIRES considerations if we have time, but I want to just go on to the other instruments because I think these are important for you to know as well. These are not really hibernations, but a mode of an instrument is no longer available. NurseFowl, which is NurseSpec behind AO, and KPIC become unavailable after scales arise. So now's your last chance to apply for those modes of operation. Another recommendation is NERC2 will be hibernated in 2027A with decommissioning plan in 2028A. That's 1 year after scales commissioning. And we do this knowing that there are long-term programs that, just like for high-res to KPF, we have to be careful about transitioning long-term programs from NERC2 onto scales. And so there is some recommendation for cross-calibration that needs to occur first. ESI will be hibernated at the end of 2026A and then decommissioned in 2027A. That happens before the scales delivery, again, to try and keep the total number of instruments down, as you saw on Rich's plot. OSIRIS is recommended to be hibernated 1 year after LIGER is commissioned, of course, if LIGER gets fully funded. And lastly, most long-term, high-res is being considered for decommissioning in a window of 2027 to 2029. Most of the high-res science has transitioned to KPF, but not all of it. And where we could use your help is figuring out what is the science capability that we might not be able to do with KPF or could do with KPF, but with lesser sensitivity or signal noise, and what is the impact there. So really having a good quantitative knowledge of that impact. Okay, so we're gonna just two last slides here. We'll talk more about the instrument suite evolution in a moment. Just a flavor of some other topics that we're talking about. Unattended night operations. This is moving from driving the telescope up at the summit to driving it down entirely from Waimea. And we're trying to ensure the scientific value of a night's preserved as much as possible when UNO, the unattended night operations, takes effect. We're considering KPF community cadence, so almost like a queue for KPF observations. And TOO policy, for those of you who are time domain astronomers, you know we've had a nice TOO policy in place for the last several years. A request from the SSE, please don't trigger all your TOOs in the last month of a semester. You know who you are. Yeah, the rest of us would appreciate it. In the SSE, we hear a lot of it. Okay, and then last bit of announcement, we have a new AO working group that's spun up, and I'm happy to announce we have our first two co-chairs, Tuan Do and Dimitri Malway. Given the recent instability in the AO system, I think it's clear we need to be able to merge all our desires for AO, for the current system and future AO systems in a way that's more sustainable. And that's really the aim of this AO working group. The charge is shown there. And if you're interested, Tuan and Dimitri will be reaching out for membership for that committee coming soon. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pass it on and remind you there's lots of opportunities for input to the SSE. You can join the SSE meetings, and I think we're going to kick over to the instrument suite evolution breakout discussion now. Thanks.
Thank you, Jess.